As a result of the lesson, my students were able to identify the struggles of founding a new nation after the Revolutionary War. I find this lesson very essential to students' understanding of the Constitution that we have today because they can better understand how hard it was for them to create this government that we have, and then they can use that to compare it to the Articles of Confederation that our founders had first created. During the lesson, we started discussing the strengths of our first Constitution, and I tried to prompt the students with each one of these to see if they could actually understand that they were weaknesses in disguise. At one point during the lesson, it did not seem like they were completely inferring that these were weaknesses, so I modified the way that I was prompting the questions that I had not done in the previous period, asking the students specifically what would happen if states had all the power and if we didn't have a strong national government. In a similar way, at the very beginning, my question for the slides pertained to the pictures, which did not all show up, and I was trying to show that there were 13 stars, and they were separated and connected in order to demonstrate the loose league of states that our Articles of Confederation created. This was the first indication of a real modification that I had to be made for this period because the technology was not working. I then realized I would have to do further prompting for the students because the images that I'd counted on were not following through. I used different assessment modes during this lesson, not strictly just on pen and paper completion, but also through personal communication with the students. I believe that the various assessments I gathered were very beneficial and they could be done extremely quickly. I could then easily modify the lesson in order to engage the students properly or help them to understand better. Completing the foldable was an assessment that was appropriate for identifying the weaknesses of the Confederation and to make sure that the students would not only see it but to also write it down. I think assigning a weakness to each finger on the hand really helped the students to associate a color or aspect of the finger to that particular weakness. Once the students wrote it, they also had to shade that color, and this engaged the students and gave them a way to more easily remember it. I think that first going through the strengths helped to reinforce how necessary a new constitution was, and by understanding these problems, they can more easily understand the foldable. The post-assessment was also beneficial because it helped them remember each weakness while pointing to the assigned finger. I think that the earlier part of the lesson we looked at the strengths helped them to understand and apply the information, and during the post-assessment, I could see how much of the lesson they understood as a whole, specifically the weaknesses. My favorite part of the lesson was making the foldable because it engaged the students and allowed them to achieve the goals. When the students participate, it helps me to better understand their needs inside and outside the classroom. I can see the schema that they have on a particular topic based on their opinion, and then I can see where to proceed from there. I believe that as a teacher, I am a lifelong learner, and there is always something I can improve upon, and I can learn from the lesson and from the students. In this lesson, I learned that technology will fail us when we need it the most. Most of the PowerPoint slides and beginning of the discussion was based on the images that did not show up, so I realized I quickly needed to adapt despite these problems. After further insight, maybe restarting the computer would have been the first step, but I'm still very pleased with the lesson. As teachers, we need to be able to problem solve and think quickly on our feet. If I were to reteach the lesson, I would have handouts prepared for the students with the images, or at least some images on construction paper ready to be used. This would not only help solve technology problems, but I think it would also be very helpful for the ELL students so that they can have it up close and receive direct instruction from the pictures. I thought that the lesson nonetheless went extremely well, and I'm proud of the majority of the students that mastered the concept. I believe they understand the goal of the Articles of Confederation, how it was not working, and then they can apply it, and when we look at the principles of the Constitution, they can see how they're there to protect the people. I think my instruction aided to their success. I tried to ask questions that would get them to think and anticipate each of the weaknesses. I think my students were most successful in that they were able to understand why the weaknesses of the Constitution were not working, and I think that the least successful part was more of the what of the Articles of Confederation, just further having them grasp that it was our first Constitution. I think I could have done better at this by previewing the lesson with, instead of a debrief, maybe a little video to remind them what the Articles of Confederation were that we had covered the previous day. I think overall this would help the students get back into the mindset and see it rather than just hear it before the lesson. But I do think that they were able to understand the Articles as a weakness and exactly why it was not working, even though they were good ideas. And I think that will later help them apply it when we study the Constitution. I am extremely proud of the progress my students made, even though there were technology problems, and I'm very proud of the way that I delivered the content.